The blood-red sunset painted the Dakota Territory sky as Katherine Cooper trudged the final mile toward Whiteridge, her boots worn through and her spirit nearly as tattered. The year was 1878, and the promise of a new beginning had turned into another door slammed in her face. She'd heard Whiteridge needed a schoolteacher, but the telegram in her pocket had proven worthless upon arrival. "We don't hire your kind," the town council chairman had sneered, his eyes traveling the length of her dust-covered form with obvious disdain. "Indian lover," someone had whispered as she turned to leave, the slur following her like a shadow. The sky darkened above, and Katherine pulled her threadbare shawl tighter. She had taught at the Lakota reservation for 3 years until government troops forced its relocation. Now, neither white settlements nor native communities would employ her, too tainted by the other world to belong in either. Rain began to fall as the first buildings of Whiteridge came into view. Katherine's honey-brown hair, once pinned neatly, now hung in damp strands around her face. Her green eyes, usually bright with determination, were dulled by exhaustion and hunger. The livery stable at the edge of town offered her only hope for shelter. She slipped inside as lightning cracked overhead, illuminating the rows of stalls. The scent of hay and horses filled her nostrils as she found an empty corner stall and sank down against the wooden slats. "Just for tonight," she whispered to herself, arranging her single valise as a pillow. "Tomorrow, I'll try again." Sleep came in fitful bursts, interrupted by the storm and her own nightmares. When dawn broke, Katherine woke to find herself shivering, her dress damp from the leaking roof. She had just begun to gather her meager belongings when a shadow fell across the straw. "This ain't a boarding house, miss." Katherine looked up to see a middle-aged man with a pronounced limp, likely the stable master, staring down at her. "I'm sorry," she said, rising quickly. "I had nowhere else to go." The man's weathered face softened slightly. "Town didn't take to you, I reckon?" Katherine nodded, brushing straw from her skirts. "I came for the teaching position." "Oh." Understanding crossed his features. "You'd be the one from the reservation." "I taught children to read," she said, chin lifting. "Nothing more." The stable master sighed. "Folks round here have long memories of the Dakota War. Don't make it right, but that's how it is." He glanced toward the door. "You'd best be moving on before Mr. Hargrove comes for his morning ride. He owns this stable and half the town." Katherine stepped into the pale morning light, the town of Whiteridge already stirring with activity. Women in calico dresses hurried to the general store, children raced toward the schoolhouse, and men gathered outside the barber shop to trade news and rumors. No one met her eye as she walked down the main street. Her stomach growled, reminding her she hadn't eaten since yesterday morning. The few coins in her pocket wouldn't stretch far, but perhaps they'd buy enough to sustain her until she reached the next town. As she approached the general store, a group of women exited, their conversation halting abruptly at the sight of her. One whispered to another, and a ripple of disapproving glances followed. "We don't serve Injun lovers here," the shopkeeper called out before she could even step onto the porch. "Move along." Katherine turned away, burning with humiliation. The Wells Fargo office was her last hope. Perhaps they'd have word of teaching positions in other settlements. She'd used her final money for the stage to Whiteridge, but maybe they'd allow her to work for passage elsewhere. "Station's closed for the week, madam," the clerk informed her without looking up from his ledger. "Next coach west leaves Monday." For days. For days with no food, no shelter, and a town full of people who'd rather she disappeared. Katherine pressed a hand against the counter to steady herself as a wave of dizziness washed over her. "You all right, miss?" the clerk asked, finally glancing up. "Fine," she managed. "Thank you." Katherine left the station and walked until she reached the town's edge, where farmland stretched toward distant foothills. A mile beyond, she could see a modest ranch house surrounded by several outbuildings and grazing cattle. With nowhere else to turn, she began walking toward it. The sun climbed higher, beating down on her uncovered head. By the time she reached the ranch's fence line, her lips were cracked and her vision swam. A large red barn stood 100 yards from the main house, its doors partially open. Katherine slipped inside, grateful for the cool darkness. Stacked hay bales lined one wall, and farm equipment filled the other. She sank down onto a bale, intending to rest for just a moment before seeking out the ranch owner. When she woke, the sun was setting once again. Katherine bolted upright, disoriented. She hadn't meant to sleep the day away. Now she'd be trespassing after dark, a dangerous position for a woman alone. The sound of boots on gravel alerted her to someone's approach. She scrambled to her feet as the barn door swung wider, and a tall figure filled the entrance. "Who's there?" A deep voice called out, followed by the metallic click of a rifle being readied. "Please don't shoot," Katherine said, stepping forward with her hands raised. "I mean no harm." The figure lowered his rifle slightly as she came into view. "What are you doing in my barn, madam?" "I needed shelter," she explained, her voice steady despite her fear. "I was turned away from town." The man stepped closer, and Katherine could finally make out his features. He was younger than she'd expected, perhaps 30, with dark hair beneath his hat and eyes the color of a summer sky. His face was tanned and weathered from outdoor work, but there was a gentleness to his expression that gave her hope. "Turned away," he repeated, frowning. "Why would they do that?" "I taught at a Lakota school before coming here," she said simply. "That's reason enough, it seems." The man studied her for a long moment, then sighed and rested his rifle against a beam. "You hungry?" The unexpected question brought tears to Katherine's eyes. She blinked them back and nodded. "Yes, sir." "Quinn," he corrected. "Quinn Garrison. And you are?" "Katherine Cooper. I go by Kate." He nodded once, then gestured toward the barn door. "Well, Miss Cooper, my supper's almost ready. No point in you staying out here when there's food and a proper roof inside." Katherine hesitated. "I don't want to cause trouble." "It's my land," Quinn said with a slight smile. "Only trouble would be if I left a lady to sleep in my barn when I've got a perfectly good spare room." The ranch house was modest but well kept. A stone fireplace dominated the main room, with comfortable furniture arranged around it. The smell of cooking food made Katherine's stomach clench painfully. "Sit," Quinn instructed, pointing to the kitchen table. "Food'll be ready in a minute." Katherine sank into a chair, watching as her unexpected host moved confidently around the kitchen, pulling a pan of cornbread from the oven and stirring a pot of something that smelled divine. "It's just beans and ham," he apologized, placing a generous portion before her. "Not much for fancy cooking." "It's perfect," she assured him, fighting the urge to devour it instantly. She waited until he sat across from her with his own plate, then ate with as much dignity as her hunger would allow. They ate in silence for several minutes before Quinn spoke again. "So you're a teacher?" Katherine nodded. "I was. For 3 years at the reservation school, and before that in Chicago." "What brought you west from Chicago?" "My parents died," she said, the familiar ache rising in her chest. "Influenza. I had no other family, and the Lakota school needed teachers desperately." Quinn nodded thoughtfully. "And now Whiteridge has turned you away despite needing a teacher?" "They'd rather have no teacher than one who's worked with native children," she confirmed. "Fools," Quinn muttered, shaking his head. "Those same folks will send their cattle to market alongside Indian agents, take their money at the general store, but heaven forbid their children learn from someone who's taught reading to Lakota kids." His indignation on her behalf warmed something inside Katherine that had grown cold over the difficult months since the reservation's closure. "You don't share their views, I take it," she observed. Quinn's expression darkened. "I judge folks by their actions, not where they've been or who they've helped. Been on the wrong side of that kind of thinking myself." Before she could ask what he meant, he stood and cleared their plates. "You look dead on your feet, Miss Cooper. The spare room's down the hall, first door on the right. There's a wash basin and towels. We can figure out what's next in the morning." Too exhausted to argue, Katherine thanked him and retreated to the offered room. It was small but clean, with a narrow bed covered in a handmade quilt. For the first time in weeks, she slept without fear. Morning brought the smell of coffee and the sound of movement in the kitchen. Katherine quickly washed her face and attempted to make herself presentable before joining her host. Quinn stood at the stove, frying eggs and bacon. He'd already been out. His boots by the door were muddy, and his shirt showed evidence of morning chores. "Good morning," she said hesitantly. He turned with a nod. "Sleep well?" "Better than I have in months," she admitted. "Thank you." Quinn gestured to the coffee pot. "Help yourself. Food's almost ready." Over breakfast, Quinn explained his situation. "I've got this place running well enough, but it's a lot for one man. Hired hands come and go with the seasons. Was thinking I could use help of a more permanent nature. What kind of help? Katherine asked cautiously. Bookkeeping, for one, he said. I can track cattle better than numbers. And I've been meaning to start a kitchen garden, but haven't had the time. Plus, there's 3 families working for me with children who could use some schooling. Katherine stared at him, hardly daring to hope. Are you offering me employment, Mr. Garrison? Quinn, he corrected again. And yes, I reckon I am. Room and board plus wages. Not much, mind you, but fair. The town won't like it, she warned. Quinn's smile had a hint of rebellion in it. I don't recall asking their permission to hire help on my own land. That afternoon, Quinn introduced Katherine to the ranch hands and their families. The Martinez family had 3 children, the Petersons had 2, and the Wilsons had 4. All ranged from 5 to 15 years old, and none had received proper schooling in over a year. Miss Cooper taught school back east and out at the reservation, Quinn explained simply. She'll be teaching your children starting Monday, along with helping me with the accounts and such. There were nods of approval from the parents and curious glances from the children. If any of them had reservations about her previous position, they kept them to themselves. Katherine suspected Quinn had already addressed the matter privately. Within a week, Katherine had established a schoolroom in a corner of the barn, cleaned and brightened with whitewash and curtains sewn from flour sacks. The children proved eager to learn, especially once they discovered her talent for storytelling. Quinn provided lumber for benches and a blackboard, watching with quiet approval as she transformed the space. You've got away with them, he observed one afternoon as the children filed out after lessons. They're bright children, Katherine replied, erasing the day's arithmetic from the board. Tommy Wilson has a real gift for figures, and Maria Martinez writes beautifully. It's not just teaching, Quinn said, leaning against the doorframe. You see them who they are, not just what they need to learn. His insight surprised her. Most men paid little attention to the nuances of teaching, viewing it merely as a practical necessity. That's what education should be, she said. Helping children discover themselves, not just filling their heads with facts. Quinn nodded thoughtfully. My schoolmaster was more interested in keeping order with his switch than in whether we learned anything. Left school at 12 to work my father's farm. Yet you read quite well, Katherine noted, having seen him with books in the evenings. Taught myself, mostly, he admitted. Had a hunger for it. As spring turned to summer, Katherine settled into life at the ranch. Her days fell into a rhythm, teaching in the mornings, tending the thriving kitchen garden in the afternoons, and helping with accounts in the evenings. The ranch hands' wives welcomed her into their circle, teaching her to make tortillas and sharing remedies for everything from sunburn to colic. Quinn remained something of a mystery. He worked from dawn until dusk, ate supper with Katherine most evenings, and often read by the fire afterward. Their conversations were easy but rarely personal. He spoke of cattle prices and weather patterns, but seldom of his past or future dreams. One evening in July, as they sat on the porch watching heat lightning flicker on the horizon, Katherine gathered her courage. Quinn, may I ask you something personal? He turned to her, his face half in shadow. Suppose so. You said once you'd been on the wrong side of people's thinking. What did you mean? Quinn was silent so long that Katherine thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was low. I fought for the Confederacy, he said. Not because I believed in slavery, never did, but because I was 17 and Virginia was home. When I came west after the war, wearing gray was enough for some folks to shut doors in my face. Katherine nodded slowly. So you understand what it's like to be judged for something that doesn't define you. I do, he agreed. War taught me that most things folks fight over ain't worth the blood spilled. Out here, a man's worth is in his work and his word, not which side he fought for or who he associates with. It's a good philosophy, Katherine said softly. Quinn's gaze met hers, lingering longer than usual. Your turn. Why'd you really leave Chicago? Teaching reservation children is noble work, but most Eastern ladies don't choose it without reason. Katherine looked out at the darkening prairie. My father was a doctor. He treated everyone immigrants, the poor, even former slaves. Some of his colleagues thought it beneath him. She paused. After my parents died, those same colleagues offered me positions as a governess or companion, always with the implication that I should be grateful for their charity. So you came west rather than accept their condescension? Quinn surmised. Yes, she admitted. Pride, perhaps, but also a desire to do meaningful work. The reservation school offered that. Nothing wrong with pride when it's earned, Quinn said. And teaching children to read, no matter their color or circumstance, is honorable work. His understanding touched her deeply. In the flickering lantern light, Katherine realized that something had shifted between them, a new awareness that made her heart beat faster when their eyes met. August brought scorching heat and the cattle roundup. Quinn worked from before dawn until after dusk, often coming home too exhausted to do more than eat and collapse into bed. Katherine found herself missing their evening conversations, watching the door each night, hoping he'd have energy for more than a brief update on the day's work. The ranch hands' wives explained that roundup was always thus. Quinn works harder than any man I've ever seen, Mrs. Wilson confided as they preserved garden vegetables. Takes on the most dangerous jobs himself rather than risk his men. Has he always been alone? Katherine asked, trying to sound merely curious. Mrs. Wilson smiled knowingly. Since he bought this place 6 years ago, there was talk of a girl back east once, but nothing came of it. One evening, as a thunderstorm built on the horizon, Katherine heard hoofbeats approaching at an unusual hour. She stepped onto the porch to see Quinn riding hard toward the house, his expression grim. Behind him, 2 ranch hands supported a third man slumped in his saddle. Pete's been gored, Quinn called out as he dismounted. Send one of the boys for the doctor in town. Katherine dispatched young Tommy Wilson and quickly cleared the kitchen table. Bring him in here, she directed, already gathering clean cloths and hot water. The injured man, Pete Martinez, was pale beneath his tan, blood soaking his right side where a bull's horn had caught him. Doctor's at least an hour away, Quinn said grimly, helping lower Pete onto the table. We need to stop the bleeding now. My father was a doctor, Katherine said, rolling up her sleeves. I assisted him often. Let me see. Quinn hesitated only briefly before stepping aside. Katherine examined the wound carefully, relieved to find it was long but not as deep as she had feared. Clean it with whiskey, she instructed, keeping her voice steady. Then I'll need thread and a needle boiled. For the next hour, Katherine worked methodically, drawing on memories of watching her father treat similar injuries. Quinn assisted silently, his capable hands steady as he passed her supplies and helped hold Pete still during the most painful moments. When she finally tied off the last stitch, Katherine stepped back. He needs rest and to avoid infection. The doctor can check my work when he arrives. Quinn followed her outside, where she finally allowed her hands to shake. Without a word, he offered her his handkerchief, and she realized tears were streaming down her face. You saved his life, Quinn said quietly. Katherine shook her head. I only did what needed doing. Few people can stay that calm in a crisis, he insisted. You're remarkable, Katherine Cooper. It was the first time he'd used her first name, and something in his tone made her look up. Quinn was watching her with an intensity she'd never seen before, his blue eyes dark in the fading light. Thank you, she whispered. For a moment, she thought he might say more, but the doctor's wagon arrived, breaking the moment. Quinn stepped away, turning to greet the physician. The doctor, a gruff older man named Simmons, examined Pete's wound with grudging approval. Clean stitching, he admitted. Where'd you learn medical work, Miss Cooper? My father was Dr. James Cooper of Chicago, she replied. The doctor's eyebrows rose. James Cooper? His paper on battlefield infections was required reading during the war. He looked at her with new respect. He taught you well. Word of Katherine's medical skill spread quickly among the ranch families. Soon, they were bringing her minor ailments, cuts, burns, fevers, seeking her advice before making the long trip to town for the doctor. Quinn observed this development with quiet pride. You're building quite a reputation, he remarked one evening as they sat on the porch, watching fireflies rise from the tall grass. Schoolteacher and healer both. Katherine smiled. I'm glad to be useful. More than useful, Quinn corrected. These folks respect you. Soon enough, the town will hear of it too. As if his words were prophetic, the very next day brought a visitor from Whiteridge, the mayor's wife herself, Mrs. Thornton, looking distinctly uncomfortable as she approached the house. Miss Cooper, she said stiffly, I understand you have some medical knowledge. Katherine nodded cautiously. Some, yes. My daughter, Mrs. Thornton continued, clearly struggling with her pride. She's with child, her first, and having a difficult time. Dr. Simmons suggested you might. That is, he spoke highly of your skills. The request stunned Katherine. This woman had been among those who whispered Indian lover in the general store just months ago. I'd be happy to help, Katherine said simply. Quinn insisted on driving her to town himself. People need to see you aren't coming in shame, he explained as he helped her into the wagon. You're doing them a service, not the other way around. When they reached Whiteridge, heads turned as Quinn escorted Katherine to the mayor's house. She spent hours with the young Mrs. Thornton, easing her discomfort and sharing knowledge about what to expect in the coming months. As they left, Quinn's hand rested briefly at the small of her back, a small gesture of support that sent warmth spreading through her. You've won a battle today, he observed as they drove home under a canopy of stars. Changed at least one mind. Perhaps, she agreed. Though I suspect it's temporary gratitude rather than genuine acceptance. Quinn's hand covered hers where it rested on the seat between them. Change starts somewhere, Kate. Her heart leaped at both the touch and the familiar use of her name. When she looked up at him, his profile against the night sky seemed impossibly dear, the straight nose, the stubborn chin, the lines at the corners of his eyes from squinting into the sun. Thank you, she said softly, for opening your door that day. Quinn's fingers tightened around hers. Best decision I ever made. The autumn cattle drive took Quinn away for 3 weeks. Katherine found herself watching the horizon each evening, counting the days until his return. The ranch seemed emptier without his presence, though she kept busy with teaching and helping the ranch wives prepare for winter. On a crisp October morning, Katherine spotted riders approaching. She shaded her eyes against the low sun, her heart quickening when she recognized Quinn's tall figure in the lead. She hurried out to meet them, trying to contain her joy to a respectable welcome. Quinn dismounted stiffly, looking trail-worn but pleased. Good price for the herd, he reported, his eyes never leaving her face. Better than expected. That night, after he'd bathed and rested, they sat by the fire drinking coffee. Quinn seemed unusually thoughtful, starting several conversations only to let them fade into comfortable silence. Finally, he set his cup aside. Did you manage all right while I was gone? Of course, Katherine assured him. Though it was quieter without you. Quinn nodded, staring into the fire. Been thinking on the trail. About the future. Katherine's pulse quickened. Oh, this place is doing well, he said slowly. Could do better with the right improvements. Been saving to build a proper house. This one has always seemed perfectly comfortable, Katherine observed. It's a bachelor's house, Quinn replied, meeting her eyes directly. Not suited for a family. Katherine felt heat rise in her cheeks. I see. Do you? He asked, leaning forward. Kate, I've been riding for weeks with nothing but my thoughts for company, and all of them circled back to you. Her breath caught. Quinn, let me finish, he said gently. When I found you in my barn, I thought I was helping someone in need. Didn't realize you'd be helping me more. This place was just land and cattle before. Now it feels like a home. He rose and crossed to where she sat, kneeling before her chair. I love you, Katherine Cooper. Not just for your kindness or your courage, though I admire both. I love the way you laugh when the children say something clever. The way you hum while you work in the garden. The fierce look in your eyes when you're standing up for what's right. Tears blurred Katherine's vision as Quinn took her hands in his. I know it's not been quite a year, he continued, and I'm not offering the kind of life you might have had back east. But if you could see your way to becoming Mrs. Garrison, I'd spend every day trying to deserve you. Katherine slid from her chair to kneel with him on the hearth rug. I love you too, she whispered. And there's no life I'd rather have than one with you, right here. Their first kiss was gentle, a tender promise that deepened as Quinn's arms encircled her. When they finally parted, both were smiling. Is that a yes? Quinn asked. Yes, Katherine confirmed, laughing through her tears. 1,000 times yes. They married on Christmas Day, with the ranch hands' families and, surprisingly, several townspeople in attendance. Dr. Simmons came, as did the mayor's daughter and her husband. Even the stable master who had shown Katherine kindness on her first day limped in for the ceremony. Spring brought the completion of the new house larger, with a proper parlor and several bedrooms. Room to grow into, Quinn explained with a hopeful smile that made Katherine blush. By summer, Catherine's expanding waistline confirmed those hopes. The town of Whiteridge gradually warmed to her, especially after she began holding classes 1 day a week for children who lived too far from the schoolhouse to attend regularly. "Never thought I'd see the day," Quinn remarked as they watched the last wagon of town children depart one afternoon. Whiteridge sending their young ones to learn from the woman they turned away. Katherine smiled, her hand resting on her rounded belly. "People can change when given reason to." "Some can," Quinn agreed, placing his hand over hers. "Others are stubborn as mules." "Like certain ranchers I could name," she teased. Quinn laughed, pulling her close. "Stubborn enough to know a treasure when I find one sleeping in my barn." That night, as they sat on the porch of their new home watching the sunset paint the prairie gold, Katherine reflected on how completely her life had transformed in just over a year. "What are you thinking about?" Quinn asked, his arm warm around her shoulders. "About doors," she replied. "How one closing can lead to another opening." Quinn pressed a kiss to her temple. "Best door I ever opened." Katherine turned her face to his. "And the best barn I ever slept in." Their laughter mingled in the evening air, a joyful sound that carried across the land that had become their home, a place where judgment had given way to understanding, rejection to acceptance, and two lonely souls had found belonging in each other's hearts.